Hey everyone, I couldn't find my black turtleneck, but it was fun watching the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference, wasn't it? You're watching Techstrong Gang. Hi everyone, it's Alan Schimmel and welcome here to our Wednesday edition of the Techstrong Gang. We've got a great lineup of people, gang members to talk with today, as well as some interesting things to talk about. Of course, it was Apple WWDC Day on Monday, and we're going to dive into that. We're going to talk a little bit about vibe coding for the enterprise. Hey, it's coming at you. And then lastly, as usual, our government continues to just churn. I don't know if it's churn for churn's sake or just I don't know what it is, but we'll talk about it, some new executive orders regarding cybersecurity. Let me introduce you to our distinguished gang member panel today. First of all, I'm happy. I missed his debut last week. I was away on vacation. But he's no stranger to the Futurum group. He's no stranger to people in the chief technology officer role. As a matter of fact, he is the chief technology advisor. Keith Townsend. Keith, welcome. I'm thrilled to have you on here on the show with me, and thank you.
Good to be here with you, actually on your own show.
Yeah, no, it's good to be back. Also joining us, and by the way, Keith works a ton with our friend Steve Foskett over at Tech Field Day. Speaking of Tech Field Day, he is a Tech Field Day delegate extraordinaire, as well as a terrific analyst in his own right, really honed in on cyber. Our friend Jack Poehler. Hey, Jack, how are you?
Doing great today. Thanks. Pleasure to be here.
I'm wonderful. Thank you. Glad to be back. I was starting to wonder, was this something I said?
No, we you could be on every day if you want. And then lastly, our winter warrior, one-armed Jack there, Lefty, the guitar man, he's a Futurum analyst, Mitch Ashley. Hey, Mitchell.
Just call me Bucky.
Bucky, the winter soldier.
Yeah, I feel like this is a Tech Field Day masquerading as a Techstrong Gang show.
Yeah, well, we do have a distinct Tech Field Day flavor to it, but that's good. We're all one Futurum family, so that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Well, I think I've done over 40 full field day events. So yeah, this is right between me and Jack. We're representing field day pretty well there.
I'm still in the single digits, so I think I'm like 8 or 9. But.
It's all good. It's all good. Just a quick plug. You can watch all the Tech Field Days right on techstrong.tv, on our YouTube channel, or on the Techstrong TV OTT channel, where we've built up a nice collection of field day podcasts and everything else. That's on Apple TV and Roku and Amazon, as well as iOS and Google. Anyway, hey guys, speaking of iOS, I don't know what I wouldn't give to see Steve Jobs walk out in a black turtleneck to a live audience and present. I watched the show. I watched it on my Apple TV last night. It was so slick. I didn't know if I was watching a Disney show or Apple or what it was. I'll be honest. I'm not a fan of the whole pre-recorded thing. I don't know. And you follow this space closely.
Yes, I'm ex-Apple as well. Apple is I was a developer designer in Apple Education Enterprise Marketing. That is when I stopped being a developer and when I became a marketer. That is the line of demarcation in my career.
And nothing was ever the same?
Nothing was ever the same. I was there as iTunes launched, which will date me pretty hard. And I remember we used to all wear black turtlenecks and jeans on keynote days. It was a very special experience in my life I will never forget. But that being said, I don't look at the company with rose-colored glasses, and I suppose that might be why you thought of me for today. I carry a Google Pixel. I also have an iPhone, I should say, but my primary phone is an Android for that reason. I think this was a very glossy yet slightly disappointing uh, announcement. I mean, some of it made sense, like let's name the iOS for the years. Great. Okay. I wasn't really worried. It just seems like sort of like maybe an internal thing that became external. The glass, look and feel cool. I think where a lot of people were left wanting was with the AI bits. I think that's where they caught the most flack, because tell me if I'm wrong here, guys, but integrating ChatGPT is not something I think is announceable at this point in the game. I think they're just catching up. And I honestly thought about it this morning. I was like, is Apple essentially a ChatGPT wrapper? Is this where we are? Is this where they are? I mean, they must be hiding something awesome, is all I could think.
This felt like, because I've been to some of these events too. I actually went to some of the jobs events. This felt like a point update, 0.0 update, dot 1, dot 3 update, not a full developer conference event. Yes, there's a new UI redesigned. Okay, it looks slick. It actually kind of looks slick, like the recorded videos look slick, Alan. Yeah, it wasn't in it. And going into it, I was thinking, is Apple going to resurrect themselves on AI? I kind of doubt it, because they sure haven't led up to it, and they didn't. Which I think is a good thing that they didn't try to fake it until they make it, because people would just pan them more so than for what they did. But I think it was a lot of kind of random features. So I get translation to French on my phone instead of in the cloud, and I can do more ChatGPT things. Okay. There's some new features. There's helpful things. But again, it just made me think like, okay, are we in the John Scully days and we need Jobs to come back and kind of resurrect Apple? Are we headed that way?
I like the way you're using the word resurrect with Jobs in the same sentence, because that's pretty much what it would take at this point.
We'd have to reanimate him, but we might have the technology now.
Yeah, I'd be okay with a hologram.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, this was not that different than Google's recent announcements, where they just hit us with a milieu of
a lot of features,
50 things that weren't that interesting, but as a whole were packaged as something great. But the difference is this is Apple, so they did it with like a cool, fun vibe.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to see a post-Jobs Apple, which is, well over multi-trillion-dollar company. How do you still stay innovative but not cannibalize your revenue? It is a very good business. And what happens when you have a very good business and you're met with quarterly demands, et cetera, et cetera? I don't know. It is a different Apple. It's funny that, I think part of it is half jokingly, but seriously, Apple's dead, but they make billions of dollars a quarter. Revenues continuing to grow. AI, we'll get into the conversation around, how real is AGI and all of that coming along with it. Apple put out a very provocative paper earlier this week. And so the question is, how much AI is enough to continue the insane run rate that this business has? And it's as technologists, we want to see them push the envelope. I'm not a big Apple investor, and I'd rather see them, give me the next. What does Steve Jobs say? It's a communications device. It's a internet device. And I forget what the third one thing. Give me another one of those moments.
But has Apple really, is it a computer company anymore, or is it really a media and entertainment company? I haven't looked lately at, the financials, but I'm going to guess that a majority of the revenue comes from the media and entertainment and the App Store, and not from hardware and technology design and innovation. And, they're really chasing the majority of their business, which is not technology innovation.
Well, look, the opening of the conference was a plug for the upcoming F1 movie, right? The Brad
Which will
Pitt
be in theaters.
Yeah, on the 27th. Yeah. I'm going to
iPhone
go.
sales are 51% of their revenue.
Yeah, it's still computers, but there is a sizable app store media, component to their revenue. But here's what I'm hearing from you guys. And we've heard it, unfortunately, since Steve Jobs' untimely death. Where is the innovation in Apple? If you're an Apple person, and I get this, I have a lot of friends who are Apple fanboys. They get off on the new UI. What's it, the transparent glass, floating glass, whatever they're calling it. That is, it's pretty. Liquid glass, excuse me. No doubt about it, it's pretty. And if you are an Apple aficionado, that's the kind of stuff, they get off on, right? Look how pretty it is, rounded edges. We went from square edges to rounded. This is a throwback to Johnny Ives. I was expecting to hear more about what font they were using. They did mention it was the San Francisco font, right? Because it dynamically resizes the clock depending on what background you have. And they said it was the San Francisco font, right? Steve Jobs was fanatical about fonts. That was his thing, right? Fonts. But where's really the innovation here? They recapped what they already had in Apple Intelligence and said more coming soon. But Keith Townsend, to your point, they tipped their hand when they released that paper that kind of crapped all over, AI's ability to really reason. You could have read that paper and said, don't expect to see anything big on AI from Apple, because they wouldn't have released that academic paper on the heels of, just preceding this event had they had some big AI news.
Yeah, you sell what you have on the truck, right? And Apple on the truck has the iPhone reasonably, or any mobile device reasonably can probably do a 7 billion parameter model relatively within the spec of the machine. And you can do some really interesting stuff with a 7 billion parameter model. I think small, large models are the way. But when you're thinking about consumer AI, a 7 billion parameter model just isn't going to get the job done. It will get the job done when you're talking about industry and specific verticals. But, this lack of ability to do the trillion parameter model and needing to outsource capabilities, like my action button on my phone is to chat GTP. So, and that tells you kind of where Apple is at when they're just by design. And I know folks like Jack can appreciate the security focus of that, but I'm not a security person. And I want Chat GTP to have all of my data so I can get the best outcome.
Well, and to that point, Keith, in years past, having something that ran on the phone would be very important. Doing inference on the phone, right, or on the mobile device. With modern connectivity, are we really disconnected enough that we can't leverage inference in the cloud, right? And in fact, part of the issue is the performance of inference in the cloud may actually be better than performance on your phone, and even with latency, you might still have a better user experience running off the cloud.
But are we saying they didn't do this for security concerns? Because I don't know if that's necessarily true.
No, I think it's all the reverse.
I'll be honest. You know what I think of the whole Chat GPT Apple relationship is it reminds me of when they used Intel chips. Right? They never used Intel chips. Then they went to Intel chips because Intel had something they didn't have. And they used it just long enough until they had their own silicon again.
Right. And they're end-of-lifing updates for those chips now.
Which is amazing, because if I would have bought a Intel Mac Pro just a couple of years ago with these monster Xeon chips and 192 gig of RAM or 512 gigabytes of RAM, and I can't update to the latest OS today, I'd be pretty disappointed. That was $10,000 more on a workstation, and I can't get the latest OS just a few years later would be frustrating.
Yep. It is.
I mean, they were the masters of planned obsolescence.
Yeah, but
really,
I was just
really
going to say that
yeah.
This is not the first time Apple's pulled this trick, right? This is Apple 101 stuff. Hey, And that was always the difference. Microsoft bent over backwards and twisted into a pretzel for backwards compatibility. Apple, not so much. That was never their game.
Actually, I think it's the opposite game, is they really want you to always be on the latest and greatest hardware, and they're forcing you to upgrade rather than doing that. You call it planned obsolescence. I call it planned revisionism, right? It's planned upgrades.
Although whenever I travel with my Dell laptop as opposed to my MacBook, and I take a photo during a conference, and then I look towards my Dell laptop and I'm like, wait, where's the image? So I can tweet it out and put more detail around it. Functionally, I gotta tell you, I'm on that train, because from a productivity for a creator and from a productivity perspective, that combination is killer.
Well, that kind of closed system between hardware and software enables those kind of features, which are very handy. I agree with you. I think the question is now, it isn't what did they announce yesterday or the day before. It's what's going to happen next. Are we going to see something credible in terms of AI coming out later in the year when they do phone announcements and things like that, or something down the road? Are we going to be in this kind of nuclear winter, waiting for waiting for things to clear before we see some AI coming, or true AI coming out of Apple? I don't know. It seems like they're battling on a lot of fronts. They're battling tariffs and where things are manufactured. They're trying to catch up on AI. They're not in a good place right now. Making tons of money.
Wait, Mitch, you know what this right here is? That's the smallest violin in the world, playing Hearts and Flowers for poor dear old Apple, who makes billions of dollars a quarter. Let's not quite throw dirt on their grave yet right now.
I can predict Apple AI announcements for around the iPhone, whatever the next iPhone is. I didn't buy my latest iPhone because of their AI announcements from last year. I bought it because the camera's better and I create video content. So, and I'm very happy with that. I bought it for that integration. But I am very much looking at Android machines, similar to you. And I'm looking at, I will probably go out and buy some type of Android device. And I think Apple needs to worry about this as the tech consumer that I am. The functionality that I want out of my mobile AI experience, Apple is not providing it. Android is, and it is that important to me, someone who's fully in the Apple ecosystem, that I'm willing to, at least for now, get a second device that satisfies my AI needs.
Absolutely. And the last thing I want to say on this is the Apple XR. Apple Vision Pro was very exciting to me at the time as someone who's spent some time in that industry. And they really haven't answered to what's happening next, other than maybe there's a stripped down headset, maybe it's whatever. I mean, the headset gave my friend black eyes. Like, there was a swing and a miss there, right? But all they announced in that realm at South by Southwest this year was, hey, we've got Metallica, full-length movie. It's an XR. So I have to wonder if the whole virtual augmented reality move for them is going to be content. I don't know that it's going to be hardware. I don't think they can compete in that realm. The Oculus, all these other headsets are, the Vive, they're cheaper and better already. They were so late, and I would hate to see that happen with AI. I really would. However, being the last AI is not a bad thing because you're learning from everybody else, right?
Especially in a market that's as fast moving. But that being said, Anne, you just described the real conundrum with Apple, which is, where is the next big thing? It's not the AR goggles. Okay. The watch, they had some nice watch features, but is it wearables? Is it some other sort of wearable? Not a watch. What can they do to the phone? Keith, to your point, they could every iteration of the phone and the Galaxy as well. They improve the lenses and so forth, the technology. But what can they? What's the next big thing for them?
Alan, that's been the question
Since
Really?
just Steve Jobs died, unfortunately.
Exactly.
That's been
That
the
was the
question.
sort of test, the litmus test. Are they going to be able to continue to innovate? And
Now,
so far,
I
it's
will
working.
tell you, they've innovated on silicon, right? I will tell you,
True.
some of our video
Yeah.
team here just got the new Apple M4 Ultra Studios. They're hot. They're hot machines. What he used to do on his M1 took like 4 hours or 6 hours. Now gets done in 1 hour on that M4 Ultra. So, I don't think let's not make it all negative. They've done a great job innovating on the silicon.
So Alan, let's think about the sort of the elephant in the room, which is Johnny Ive's departure and going over to AI and to develop AI products. And I just recently acquired an AI based pin for doing live meeting recording. Right, so it does records at a meeting and then does a transcription plus an AI summary. And I found that very helpful because it allows me to immerse myself in the meeting and not focus on actually taking notes. So I can have 100% attention on what I'm doing. And that's sort of that functionality could be built into a phone or could be built into some other device you have. And that maybe that's the direction Johnny Ive's going with great industrial design and yada, yada, yada. Maybe it's not, but those are the areas where AI can be really useful. And it seems like right now, either Apple's taking a wait and see approach or they're swinging at the fences and failing with whatever they're doing is, they put a lot of effort into bringing AI and the chips on the phone, but then no vision maybe for what's they're going to do with that AI capability. I think that's the disappointing part.
I think combining the two ideas, the M series of processors are flat amazing. I bought my then video editor one 3 years ago, and he still has an M1, and he's still completely happy with it 3 years later. Incredible innovation. I run Olama on my M2 Mac Pro, and it is for local development and inferencing. Fine. Which I can't say that about my latest deal with an Intel Arc processor. The ecosystem is there. So there's a lot of promising from the Apple's innovation around silicon and the ability to put GPUs on system on chips, extended battery life. There's a lot of good stuff going there, but not enough to keep folks like us happy. We're pushing them, I think, harder and faster than what we would have in the past.
So let me postulate one thing here, and then we'll move on to our next segment. Someone mentioned it earlier, I'm not sure who. These are very interesting times for Apple. They're under a ton of pressure. Tim Cook is not a typical sort of Trump guy, right? He's not, for a lot of reasons, and I'll leave it at that. They're under a lot of pressure where, whether they can produce these iPhones in India. They certainly, producing them in China isn't a great thing. Big tech, with the Musk-Trump split, who knows how that's going to go. This may be a time where the smart money at Apple, and there's a lot of smart people at Apple still, no doubt, say, you know what? Let's just keep our head down. Let's not try to rise above the crowd and become a target. We'll keep making our billions and keep that multi-trillion-dollar, shareholder group happy. And let's just tread water and see which way the wind blows here, right? And that might be the right strategy for interesting times that we live in.
I agree completely. And I think Apple under Steve Jobs taught us that computers could be magic. Tech can be magic. And I think that we have come to expect that from them. And I think that's why it's so easy to get upset with them when they have announcements like this, because you've been trained to expect magic. Yes. And this is a time we could use it. And there's a time when there's magic elsewhere. We're seeing it with DeepSeek and other, the rise of these companies overnight. And so it feels like they should be at the forefront here, but maybe that's just not where they are anymore.
No, I think they're keeping their head low.
I think there's something to be said for that, Alan. Keep your head low. Don't turkeys that get shot the one that raise their head above the law.
That's exactly it. Yep. It's an old saying from our friend in Nebraska.
Here you go.
All right, Bucky. Let's take a break here on Techstrong Gang. We're going to come back and we're going to talk vibe coding. Extreme coding 2? Enterprise? I don't know. You're watching Techstrong Gang. Hey, everyone, and we're back here at Techstrong Gang. Recently we had an article up at DevOps.com written by none other than Keith Townsend about scaling vibe coding in enterprise IT, a CTO's guide to navigating architectural complexity, product management, and governance. Hey, throwing all that out, is vibe coding an enterprise tool? Is that what you're trying to say, Keith? Or what are we talking about here?
So whether or not it's an enterprise tool or not is, kind of going back to our previous conversation. I remember when the iPhone first hit and I was managing mobile devices in the enterprise. And I questioned, is the iPhone an enterprise mobile device? And early iPhone through 1 through 3 was the answer to that question was no. Did that stop employees from bringing in iPhones and forcing my hand as an IT director to start supporting iPhones? No, it did not. So we can ask the question, is vibe coding the enterprise IT tool? No, not today. I think generally speaking, not in the sense that we've looked at it from, if we look at like the nominal sense of vibe coding, me and Mitch did a podcast last week with Eric Bethke, our CTO of Futurum Group, and he reminded us that vibe coding did not, mean what it means today to give someone like me, who's not a developer, these tools to develop, but for seasoned developers to use it. We're talking in a context of giving the tool to people like me and recreating the mess that we had in the early 2000s of Lotus Notes. Creating real tools with this low code, no code capability that delivers legit business value, but creates this nightmare for CTOs. If you remember needing to either maintain Lotus Notes databases, the landscape, or needing to migrate off of Lotus Notes, if you're that old, you should probably check your cholesterol, 1. And then 2, you remember the pain of bringing in these low code, no code tools. And even if you've done recently RPA or Repto, these new low code, no code tools, you have this challenge of how do you maintain all of this new code that's really supporting legit business processes that become mission critical.
So first of all, I got to tell you, Keith, I helped take a company public that was built on hosted Lotus Notes. And we were doing that custom, and not only that, I will tell you, Microsoft paid us $10 million to try to build a similar platform on top of Exchange that would allow you to build those simple apps that everyone was using on top of Lotus Notes, right? And we couldn't do it because Exchange, believe it or not, just wasn't as solid under the covers as Notes was.
As somebody who had to support Exchange 5.5, 100% there, it just was not. Lotus Notes was funny. All made it simple. The design, that client server architecture for Lotus Notes was rock solid. Replication just simply worked. A lot of stuff of it was just really, it lended itself to the type of capabilities that you could do. So, imagine from a workflow perspective, you can take you're an executive and you're on a flight and you need to reconcile some invoices, whatever the business process you do. You replicated your Lotus Notes database offline to your local machine. You made the changes on flight. Well, then when you connect it back
You replicate.
to the data center connectivity, it replicated the changes up. So this was, early 2000s before we had, these modern React apps where, you expected to on the server side, amazingly simple technology that enabled the business. Vibe coding or the concept is the same thing. I can just go to Cursor AI and write really complex software without knowing how to code. And if that scares you, it probably should, because users are doing it, and they are, as I kind of talked through what the application I wrote, the CTO scanner. That was that's the premise of it, to be able to write pretty extensive code that uses OpenAI to triage RSS feeds and blog posts, and then create reports, and then accelerate my ability to disseminate data.
Well, first of all, personal point of privilege. I'm having some serious Lotus Notes PTSD, so you guys need to back off a little bit here. I took over some really bad situations. Not that I don't like it, but anyway. First of all, Keith, fantastic article, but even more importantly, I love what you did here, which is go on one of those journeys of trying something, in this case, vibe coding, learning a lot from it, sharing it with us, via LinkedIn and social, and writing these articles and all of that. So you're a master at kind of that storytelling journey and sharing that. So appreciate that very much. I think the point is here, you one of the things that you came to, I think, tell if I'm correct, is there's really two paths we're talking about around agentic or AI-based development. There's the professional developer, like people that this is my job, that's what I do, I write code. And then there's the end user, we might call them citizen developers. And to your point, those two things kind of need to evolve in their own ways. And you can see that today, because when we talk about agentic or AI IDEs, to throw a bunch of acronyms at us, the whether it's Cursor or it's using Copilot inside of Visual Studio or whatever, Visual Code Studio, it's a hybrid interface. One side is your AI stuff that you're chatting with it, and you're giving it a command, you're looking at its output. The other side's code and stuff being generated. And generally, they follow this kind of hybrid architecture. That's not something an end user is going to connect with. And even Firebase that you used, from Google, relatively new, or I guess it's a new version of a technology they acquired. It's still that model. So vibe coding today is really for professional developers. Not that it can't be used, but when I see articles about, the CEO built an app, using Cursor or built whatever, I don't think it's the same kind of app, even the quality of an app we would have built with Lotus Notes in the day. That was made to be able to do that. And I think we're going to have to evolve that technology along with the professional developer.
Well, look, there's a parallel here to the low-code, no-code stuff, right? If you speak to the low-code, no-code vendors, Automation Anywhere, RPA, some of the others, they tend to develop their product for two different audiences. One is what we used to call the citizen developer, and some people get freaky when you say that now. But the non-pro developer. Keith, great example. Technically proficient person, but not a professional developer. And then you have low-code, no-code kind of tools for the professional developer that sort of 10x their productivity. And I think with vibe coding, it's the same thing. But here's something else that I've observed over the years, and I 100% believe on this. Many technologies, such as vibe coding, don't come to the enterprise by knocking on the front door or ringing the doorbell. They come in through the cellar or the back door.
Through the backpack.
Through the backpack, right? That's a good way of putting it, Mitch. I saw it happen with open source. I saw it happen with Wi-Fi, right? I remember going to I think it was Fort Carson, Mitch, out in Colorado, right? With the Duum from Fort Carson. I said, what are you doing for Wi-Fi security? And he says, we don't have Wi-Fi security problems. We don't allow Wi-Fi. And as he's saying that, I'm seeing people unplug their WAP and throwing them under the desk, And then as soon as he passes, they plug it back in. The same thing with open source. All of a sudden, what happened to all that Unix? It's all Linux, right? Same thing with the cloud, the whole shadow IT thing. How the hell did we get all this stuff on Amazon? No, I put it on my credit card.
So I'll step in here and say at one time I wore the hat of a professional developer, and a software development tool is a software development tool, and if you're an old guy like me, sometimes adapting to new tools is easy, sometimes it isn't. I was responsible for dragging Novell kicking and screaming from x86 assembly into modern compiled languages because the developers of NetWare did not believe that a compiler could generate code that would run faster or be better than they could. And that was
Still can't, damn it.
Go play in front of your own house.
Right. But so I look at vibe in one sense. I look at vibe coding as another tool like a compiler. It's going to accelerate your work. If you are a professional developer, you just have to understand the tool and its limitations, just like you have to do any other tool and its limitations, right? And if you accept AI generated code without reviewing it, understanding exactly what that code is doing, particularly on the security side, you are opening yourselves up for a world of hurt sometime in the future. If you are the, as I think you termed it, the citizen developer, the Keith Townsend in the world, where I'm challenged with this is that right now, vibe coding doesn't have a platform built around it in the way that a traditional low code, no code, whether it's Lotus Notes or any other tool has, like Microsoft.NET or any of these other low code, no code environments have a platform and an environment that brings with it security and takes care of the basics so that you don't have to do that. So you can focus on automating a workflow in one form or another, rather than worrying about how do you have a user login, or how do you do security, or how do you connect to the internet, and all of those other concerns that we have. The platform takes care of it for you, but I don't believe today, and I could be wrong, but does vibe coding actually provide that type of platform and take care of the basic concerns for you?
Yeah. So Jack, you're hitting kind of the cliff that I came to when it came to using vibe coding in my role. And I don't mind the term citizen developer because, whatever. But I got to a point where I wanted to have refactored the application from a Python, was essentially started out as a Python script, and had evolved. Our good friend Stephen Foskett said, "Hey, Keith, it'd be great if you put a web interface in front of this." And that sent me down this horrible journey of needing to create a back end, and then went from a simple Python Flask-based architecture to me now needing to look at React, and now I'm bringing in Firebase because there's all these back end decisions that you have to make, and you could easily go down this route of saying, okay, I'll deploy a Kubernetes cluster for a scanner that's meant to run on my laptop. So it is, and when you're not a knowledgeable developer, you can be a knowledgeable front-end developer and just not know back-end stuff. Like, I want to use Google authentication for this. I want to use some type of, what am I going to use persistent storage? How am I going to secure that persistent storage? All of these decisions that you have to make on the back end, there's no given platform out the gate for vibe coders. If you're knowledgeable and you say, I can use Heroku, I can use Firebase, I can use all of these past platforms to make these decisions for me. And there's still decisions that need to be made that's beyond the skill set of a non-developer.
So you're saying we're going to have citizen Kubernetes? Is that what we're going to have? No, you both.
That's as bad as the name vibe coding, Mitch.
Yeah, no, you're both are spot on this point. They're two parallel paths. Different Keith Kirkpatrick and I, are analyst at Futurum, and I are working on a project together of talking to the low code, no code vendors about their path of how they are moving to a vibe coding or whatever you want to call it. But they're introducing AI driven capability for building apps. And to your point, Jack, it's very much, I have a platform that we do these things. I have constructs of, here's a whatever we're going to call it, a method or a connection thing or some functionality that's packaged in a piece of capability that they put together in the UI that they use to build the applications. That's a different way of coding, if you want to think of that. You can call it coding still. That's a different way of constructing software. And there are a lot of things that come with it, the security that comes with it, the backend connection to the data, whatever it might be. You still may have to work with a professional developer, IT person to get some of those other things done with you, but you can do most of it yourself. And so they're taking a different path because they've got to preserve that customer base and their skills as they move into more AI-based development or driven development. Software development is different for software developers. They're using development tools. There's a reason why the code window sits right beside the AI window. It's because you look at the output to see if you like the output, you believe it. And in your experience, Keith, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff I have to take care of to really build and deploy an app. And your app, you didn't take on building a massive enterprise app. You took on kind of a practical, good example of what does it take to build an app. So, and you had all those decisions to make. So right now it's two different paths. Maybe they converge someday, but I don't see them intersecting anytime soon.
Well, but let me give you Schimmel's law for this one. Shimmy's law. We used to think about internet time, right? Time crunch that the internet brought on. We live in an AI time crunch now, right? And so, look, it was just 2 months ago, 3 months. When did you first hear the term vibe coding with AI? Was it 3 months ago, 4 months ago?
It was invented in January.
It wasn't that long ago when we first started talking about it. It was a bit of a joke. Hey, man, feel the vibes. We were doing that hippy-dippy weatherman thing. Yeah. And no one thought you could do anything with it because AI turns out crappy code, they said. And now here we are having a legitimate discussion about what we're going to see at the enterprise level with vibe code from January to June. Where are we going to be in December?
Well, so it's that internet time that always bothers me in that from a professional coders, and I've maintained this for years, that one of the reasons we don't have good security in our applications is because professional coders are compensated on feature functionality and schedule, and they're not compensated on building secure apps. And this vibe coding and the desire to move fast, go fast and break things means go fast, break things in the security sense more than anything else. And until developers are compensated on building secure applications and the tools support building secure applications, we're going to have we keep me and Mitch and others successfully employed for many, many years talking about the lack of security in every application that comes out.
You know what? I used to think that way too. Right? And then I got a 7-step program. Because here's the deal, guys. Have any of you ever met a developer who raises their hand and says, I like producing shitty quality code. I don't really care about security. I don't care about quality. I don't have pride. You're right, Jack. The compensation is keyed into how many lines of code they develop, how fast they got stuff that's releasable. But I think with the advent of DevOps and DevSecOps, we don't call it security per se, we call it quality. But the advent of quality code that has fewer bugs, fewer security issues, is something that developers take pride in and that organizations are moving forward with in terms of saying that's the code we want, right? Because it's a lot cheaper for us to fix it there than later on. It's a lot better for us if we have better quality. Maybe it's the testing has got to improve. But I think we've done a good job where we no longer are in the world where we can say developers don't give a crap about security or quality. They do.
I don't, it's not that they don't give a crap about it, but it's that because of how companies operate, given a choice between taking longer to add or to validate the security or meeting schedule and adding new features, they tend to be forced into adding new features and meeting schedule and not to focusing on how do I validate the security. And it's not a developer issue. It's a
system.
It's a system and a compensation that values, it's cultural and it values completing, like I said, schedules and functionality over security. And so my concern is that vibe coding reinforces that issue of accelerating the schedule and doesn't, because this is all LLM based, it's non-deterministic. So it's not easy to repeatedly generate high quality, high security code.
Let me ask you a question though. Can we get another bite at the apple by somehow making vibe coding develop more secure code? Maybe we could build something into the model there. Keith?
So vibe coding can create, and if you're thinking about vibe coding from like putting it in the professional's hands, vibe coding absolutely can result in more secure code. Both talking to Eric Vetke, who uses vibe coding in his everyday software development life cycle. I talked to Brian Lau, who's a principal engineer or principal architect, software architect at AWS. They're creating hundreds of unit tests to test their code. So, and that's from using quote unquote vibe coding to do this. So they're able to test their software more than they could be than before when they were using vibe coding. So this is an example. Are we thinking about these tools? So, we up level to the CTO conversation. Are we thinking about these tools the right way? Are we using it to accelerate our processes, to write more secure code, to improve our CI/CD processes so that these unit tests are created automatically and then are testing our code and putting more rigor to the process? So these are, things that were just, again, the term was just coined in January, to both you and Mitch's point, that we are in a place that we're not quite sure where we should be using vibe coding in our software development lifecycle, whether or not we should be giving these tools directly to end users, or if we should be using this to improve our own software development processes.
I seem to remember this conversation happening a long time ago in the late 90s, early 2000s, and we called it extreme coding. It was a predecessor to Agile, but the difference was that it was focused on teamwork, pair programming, and rigorous adherence to standards. It was all about a team doing things. And think about how many developers it took to do what it takes to do one today, right? But the similarity to me to vibe coding is this sort of excitement in the way people talk about it. That it's like, we're not just coding, it's a vibe. There's a buzz to it, and it's like, we're doing more than just coding here, guys. We're extreme coding. And so I remember it being used because I was working in startups then, and I was a developer then. And I remember it being used as sort of a way to like put guardrails on for certain developers that maybe weren't as good, or maybe there was an issue with performance or language barrier, whatever it was. They were coupled together with teams. And I can see this happening with vibe coding. I can see it being used as almost like a guardrail of, well, check this. It's going to be like a babysitter in a way. But I mean, it just, to me, conceptually is so fun. It's not really the same, but just the sort of buzz about it, that we're doing something new when really we're.
It is the future. The productivity is there.
All right, guys, we are extremely late on this segment, though, so I got to pull the plug on it. If you want to read, as Mitch mentioned, great article by Keith. It is on DevOps.com. Go check it out. We're going to take a quick break. We're coming back for our C block. It looks like we've got some new executive orders undoing some security stuff. Jack, I'm sure, has some opinions on it. You're watching Techstrong Gang.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
Hey everyone, we're back here on Techstrong Gang. It's been an interesting show. We're going to wrap up with our C block for today, and that is a couple of a new executive order came out of the White House. I guess it wasn't signed by a robo-pen, but anyway, this one takes aim at some previous policies and executive orders. I don't know if any of them were congressional actual laws under the Obama and Biden administrations around some cybersecurity regs and some enforcement around hacking and especially around elections and stuff like that. Jack, what's your take on it?
Well, I think this is not a brand new order. It's really just tweaking the previous orders. And the last order that came out was by the Biden administration, but it was just 4 days before he left office. So I'm sure it was long in the making, but it was sort of like, let's throw this out there and at the very last minute. So I think that sort of raised a few eyebrows. This executive order appears to tweak some of those things in there, one of which is related to digital IDs. And given the Trump administration's focus on illegal immigrants, there's a desire to ensure that digital IDs aren't being used, aren't being encouraged to be used by people who aren't legal residents of the country. So that was one area. And then another area had to do with reducing essentially the administrative burden by removing the requirements to go through the whole process of documenting that you go through a secure software development process. And I tend to look at that one as similar to the old ISO 9001 documentation requirements. When ISO 9001 originally came out, it was touted as something that increased your reliability and your quality of production, but really all it was documenting that you had a process. Process could be absolutely horrible and could be, hey, if Joe Blow puts his tongue on the battery and sees if the battery's charged or not. If it is, it goes out the door. If it doesn't, so the quality, the process didn't have to be good. You just had to have a documentation for it. And I think right now that's where we are with a lot of the requirements by the government on software security. And so I'd like to see us really focus in more on understanding what it means rather than just documenting our existing processes.
So for me, the big thing was around the removing sort of sanctions and teeth from non-nation state threats. So certainly, right, we need to be vigilant from Russian, Chinese, North Korean, Iran, whoever the enemy of the day is, threats. But we need to be equally vigilant about any threats to the integrity of our electoral system, to the functioning of our government, critical infrastructures, and so forth. I think when you start saying we have one set of rules if it's coming from a nation state versus not a nation state, that's nonsense, because the nation states generally, when they make these sort of attacks, they're not flying flags, right? The PRC has groups in Beijing that, they're not officially government, but there's a wink and handshake, and there are groups that do these kind of things. Same thing for Russia. So, and when sometimes we have a hard time, it's more speculation than fact about how much support certain groups do get from a particular nation state.
Here's my concern about it, Alan, is that given it's tied to, not all, but in part, election security, we all know that's a highly charged political issue. It could derail the focus on cybersecurity in other areas while these maturations around, is the next election secure or not? And did we do the right things, whether we know what the right things to do or not? When really there are other areas that equal, if not more, need attention. So it in some ways, to me, was just a way that this could become even more Chris Krebs kind of situation, politically charging, cybersecurity around the election part of it and masking over issues in other areas.
Well, speaking of our friend Chris Krebs, Mitch, that was my initial take on this. Was this simply undertaken just to poke Biden and Obama at error regulation?
I think that may have been part of the motivation, but there's also another way to look at it, which is a number of cybersecurity researchers doing valid research to understand the lack of security and the security issues in some of our tools and applications and government services could be caught up and treated as nation state actors, and this does provide the government more flexibility to separate out semi-legitimate or legitimate activities from illegitimate activities and not bring the hammer down.
Yep. Guys, I need to pull the plug on this. I apologize. Keith, Jack, and Mitch, it was a great discussion today. We can come back to the EO. We'll see how that plays out, but we're out of time. Thank you all. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for Techstrong TV. We've got a full Techstrong TV schedule following. Until next time, this is Alan Schimmel for the gang. We're out.